Good morning and welcome to Mindfully Gay.
We're here.
I'm Jerry and this is John.
Hello.
And it was kind of interesting. Today is January 16th, 17th, something like that. And it didn't occur to me that this is our year anniversary.
Yeah.
We've been doing this for a year.
Yeah.
And we've had some changes.
Mm-hmm.
People probably noticed that Nick's not with us.
Right.
We do anticipate that he, on occasion, will come back and join us.
Right.
And his partner, Cole. We're recruiting and looking for people who would like to be guests.
Absolutely.
And have talked to a few people.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. There's some anxiety about showing up.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, what kind of anxiety?
Well, my description is you kind of have to sit down and be a little vulnerable, and they're like,
Well, okay. Can I tempt them with cookies?
You probably could if we strap them to your pecs.
Oh man.
But yeah, we would love to have participants.
Yeah.
And I'm going to call my friend in Colorado. I think I would love to have her join us.
Okay.
And I did say her.
Yes.
But she's a beautiful person, and I know that she would certainly help us stir the pot.
Yeah.
She's a very good interpreter of dreams.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I went on a trip to Costa Rica with her, and we were sharing dreams back and forth, and she has a really good grasp on dream analysis.
Oh, wow. That's fascinating.
Yeah. Anyways, so today came in to do the podcast, and we thought we had a topic and started talking about, I just came back from the gym and how I saw guys who had abs and pecs, and I was walking around kicking the weight equipment because how come I don't look like that?
Oh my gosh. I'm just shaking my head. But how many times have we played that game, I guess, is because I know I do it, because I love going to the gym, but I'm constantly, well, maybe not constantly, but I do catch myself just comparing and wishing and like, oh wow, he's got those big muscles, and why don't I look like that? And and the list just goes on and on and on and on. But so what is that?
We're pathetic.
We're pathetic.
Well, but then we got to talking, right? And Nick and Cole aren't here, but talked a little bit about how people have this tendency to project a story based on what we see, right? And we've talked a little bit, right? We do that with our porn stars, for instance.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this on the podcast. Like we see something happening and we think, what's wrong with me? I'm not like that. Or we don't show up in this way. Go to the gym. And I happened to be working out with Nick this morning, and I was like, man, I want those abs that look like G.I. Joe dolls,
Right.
They're just stacked on top of each other with that line down the middle.
Exactly.
And I want to be able to, wash my laundry on my abs. And what do I need to do? And he said, well, stop eating. No.
Right.
But then he said, well, it's genetics and it's this and that. I said, yeah, but look at these guys who have that. And he was very sweet, but he was just like, you're getting what your body is programmed to do and at your age and your point in life. And not that Nick ever tries to limit me, but he was trying to say, hey, we're all unique.
We're all unique.
And I thought that kind of stopped me in my tracks for a minute. And I told you the other story about there was this very handsome Latino man working out behind us who clearly is well-disciplined. And I told Nick, I said, Nick, I want to grow up and look like that guy. And his response without missing a beat was, well, what makes you think he doesn't want to grow up and look like you? And I had not even considered myself in the equation. And again, it stopped me in my tracks because I just thought, wow, that is an interesting observation.
Yeah.
I expected Nick to say, well, if you just did more of this and more of that and stopped eating and right. But it was like, no, that was his response. And I thought,
it really does flip the switch, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's some value
flip the
there.
script. Yeah. I had a similar revelation. This was some years ago, because I certainly put a lot of, what's the word? Just expectations on my own body and what I want to look like or what I should like, and do those comparisons and, create my own storylines for the people that I see at the gym. I don't know them, but I just see them, right? They're just bodies walking across the floor that look good to me, right? I'm attracted to them because of a certain aesthetic. But I forget, and this is what I learned, that sounds like this is what you experienced, I'm attracted to them, but they're probably not attracted to me.
Yeah.
Right. And but why? But why? I remember this was some years ago, and I happened to be at Gay Pride in San Francisco, and I was feeling good. I was young, and I was feeling good in my body. I had some muscles, and I was, kind of trim, and just my thing. I was feeling good, and I saw some guys.
Say it again.
I was feeling good.
I like that jiggle.
I was feeling good. And I saw some guys who I was attracted to. And what I'm attracted to, and here's another little sidetrack. Because I look a certain way, people think that I'm attracted to what I look like, if that makes sense. That's not particularly the case. I'm attracted to a little bit more fuller-bodied gentleman, maybe a beard, hairy, that kind of thing. That's what I find myself drawn to. Yeah, I like the muscles and stuff like that too, and some other things, but I find myself really drawn to a more full-figured gentleman. And I was finding myself attracted to a guy at the Pride Parade. And I think I was kind of making a little bit of a move, whatever move that could have been from me. And I was getting kind of close, maybe was touching him or something and just being friendly. And he kind of looked at me and just kind of pulled back. And he says, "No, I'm not into skinny guys." And like, "Oh, sorry," but it again, I wasn't offended, but it really flipped the script for me. Not everyone is attracted to, the muscle guy or the skinny guy or whatever. For this guy, he's not attracted to skinny guys. And so I had to remember, like, okay, wait a minute. Just because I may have muscles and I have a particular physique doesn't mean that that's what I'm attracted to. And I find myself, doing that at the gym too. So kind of fascinating.
Yeah. The pauses, I want to cry. I do this weird thing. Again, Nick called me out at the gym today because I was working out. I was kind of waiting for Nick and I was warming up, and this really handsome, muscular guy is walking by, and he's staring at me. He's got this dark beard. He's just like, it was an obvious stare, and I thought, my first thought was, what did I do wrong? Right. Am I in the wrong spot? Am I in somebody's way? Do I have their equipment? And the stare was long enough that I started to get uncomfortable. My mind didn't go to the place of, this person would be looking at me in any other way other than I'm in trouble.
Yeah, that I'm in trouble, right.
Yeah. And Nick happened to know the guy. And I said, "Oh, so is he family? Is he gay?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah." And he goes, and Nick had to point it out to me. He goes, "That guy was interested in you." I said, "I thought I was in trouble."
Like, what? War?
I don't know. And sometimes when that happens, I feel like, and Bruce makes fun of me all the time, my partner, because he's like, you're the last person to know when you're getting checked out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But I'm pretty sure I'm probably not the only person,
Right.
for the same reason that you just talked about,
Yeah.
that somewhere in our mechanism, somewhere in our psyche, right, we don't, and we've talked about this, somehow we disqualify us from the very thing that might be interesting for us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, what's that about?
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking a lot about physicality and
Yeah.
body stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, before we started the podcast, I was talking about how I'm a psychotherapist. People project a story that I sometimes feel like I have to live up to, right? I have my act together. I have perfect self-esteem. I don't struggle with any mental health challenges. Life is, they project a story, right? I've seen this. I have several friends who are in the porn industry, and frequently what I hear from them consistently is that people see them on film, but in real life, they project expectations about what people are seeing on the film. And so I think, those projections could be around gender, race, age,
right,
profession. And I don't know about you, but I sometimes feel a certain pressure to show up in meeting those expectations.
Yeah.
Even, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I sometimes, even the idea of being gay, I think people have particular, in the muggle world, the straight world, right, that maybe there's an expectation about how you do your gayness.
Yeah.
Right. And so we play it up with language. We play it up with banter. We play it up with
how we dress,
stereotypes.
Even.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I'm just kind of turning the soil. I'm not exactly sure where to take this.
But you're right. I used a word earlier before we started recording, like pigeonholing. We put people in boxes as far as expectation because of the way that they look. We may not know the person, because I know I do this. I may see a person, don't know them, but I'll create a whole story around them.
Yeah.
Or if I like with you, because you're a psychotherapist, and if people know that, and if that's the kind of the only thing they know about you, or one of the only things, then there's the certain expectation, or a way that they expect you to be in the world.
Yep.
And then, like you said, sometimes you feel like you have to kind of show up in that capacity. I think there's a give and take with that. We wear many hats because we fit many molds, and we do different things. And as a yogi, I do my yogi thing. I like to bake and do my baking thing. I teach nude yoga, and that's certainly a different thing. And I show up in a different way that way. I'm a sensual person. I show up differently in that capacity. And so there's kind of many hats as far as what makes up my persona. But when someone maybe on the outside only sees you in one of those categories,
Yeah.
then they expect you to be that and all that.
Well, it's interesting, John. We haven't talked about this, but you and I have approached the podcast, and Nick, when he was here, from a place of a certain layer of transparency, right? Where we're talking about our personal experiences and our life struggles, if you will. And it's interesting. I have clients who listen to the podcast and they'll come in and go, wow. I was like, okay, which episode did you hear?
Right, yeah. Which one you listen to? Yeah.
But I've always believed in the power of that transparency because I think our community in particular, and one of the things we're trying to do with this podcast is to kind of exploit the closet and the secrecy And we all think we're having this insulated, unique experience. And I
Right.
think by being transparent, we can say, look, we're all struggling as a marginalized part
Yeah.
of society
Mm-hmm.
to find our place.
Yeah.
And so, and we were kind of kidding about trying to draw in guests. And I do ask, have you listened to the podcast? In some cases, yes, some cases, no. And I said, we really kind of treat it as kind of a heart-centered podcast where we're somewhat vulnerable and transparent in the conversations that we have. And that changes the tone, right? There's some anxiety about what that means. And maybe we've minimized the impact, right? Out of the millions of followers that we have. But I think that is I think that's part the power of the concepts of masculinity. I don't think it's just a gay thing. I think men in general are programmed to look and be and act a certain way, and vulnerability and transparency is not one of them.
Right.
But then I think when you become part of a marginalized community where the primary focus is trying to achieve some layer of equality, that expressing vulnerability or transparency can be seen as a weakness.
Yeah.
And so then we do this comparison thing, psychologically, physically, spiritually, or whatever.
Right.
We do it very independent and insulated.
Right.
Because that's safe.
It's safer that way.
Although I would argue it's kind of like a cancer.
It can, right? We think it's safe. We like, if no one knows how I'm thinking and perceiving things, then everything's going to be okay. But you're right. That is like a cancer. It just kind of grows and festers within you. And that can turn into, it might manifest into certain behaviors that might not be very healthy. It can even make you unhealthy physically, right?
Yeah.
Thinking that way or doing that kind of holding in, right? Psychologically, emotionally, physically. So I think what we're trying to do is give an example of how it can be okay and safe to engage in conversation that happens to be a little bit more revealing and open and expressive, and,
Right.
and it doesn't take away from our masculinity or even just your identity, period, right?
Well, and I think, look, GLAMA, the Gay Lesbian Medical Association, used to have like the top 10 health concerns for gay men, top 10 health concerns for lesbians.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I haven't looked at that list lately, but it used to be that at least half of the list was of some kind of mental health variation, including addiction, depression, anxiety, minority stress, right? And the physiological, and what's interesting is GLAMA is primarily like a medical association. At the time where I was trying to get involved, I was like one of the lone mental health people there. Wow. Now I think that's changed over the years. I haven't been too involved with them. But isn't it interesting when we talk about this process of insulation and isolation psychologically, right? I would say the number one reasons I see people in my office is depression, anxiety, social anxiety,
yes,
loneliness, which is epidemic in the world, but in particular with queer folks.
Yeah.
Internalized homophobia.
Wow.
Right? And right, the concept of internalized is, again, I'm insulated. I feel isolated. And if you think about some of the Facebook groups that you and I have been tapping into, what's the number one complaint? I hate my community.
Yeah,
I feel like I don't have friends. There's nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And yet there are opportunities that people don't take advantage of. How many times have we heard with a retreat or a process that we're doing, I'm just anxious about being around other gay men. Now, when they show up, it's like, oh, wow, here's my tribe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But getting them through the door.
Yeah. Oh, it's just fascinating, what we're doing to ourselves.
Well, Right. I think this too. I watch those tracks on Facebook and the conversations, and I think it's kind of discontent breeds discontent.
Mm-hmm.
And what I don't hear, and I'm sure this is going to make me terribly popular, is I don't hear any personal accountability. I don't hear people saying, this is what I tried and here's what worked. It's, I just don't like gay men. I don't like the gay, right? It's kind of this disparaging
Just blanket.
dismissiveness,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think at the root of that too is this place of we don't see ourselves qualified for love. We don't see ourselves qualified for sex. We don't see ourselves qualified to be with the kind of people that we want to be with. That we've become a very objectified kind of a community because we haven't given ourselves permission to explore outside of the physical. And resources are not terribly abundant. Depends on where you live, but there are resources
There are
there.
resources. Yeah. What I'm seeing with some of those groups, and at first I was excited. It's like, oh, look, there's interaction, there's things going on. I saw people posting events and movie night or whatever. But then when you kind of dive deep and just kind of look a little bit more into the conversations or just what's being disseminated on there, it's more of that blanketed, you know, I don't really fit, or kind of some disgust, or whatever it might be. It just keeps that person or people kind of isolated.
Yeah.
And never really stepping in and trying something out. But again, even that accountability, not there. Really not there.
And so I think, it was interesting at the gym because I know when Nick made that comment about, well, maybe he wants to grow up and look like you,
Mm-hmm.
it really did cause me to pause. Like I kind of went into this really introspective place, and the thought was, wow, what is it about my personal narrative that doesn't give myself the space to be admired or an option, if you will, right? Not that I have to respond to that, but there is that energetic dismissiveness,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I can think about men that I've had in my office who I would describe as beautiful, as specimen of physical beauty, if you will, who have an inner critic that I'm often surprised as I think, wow, that's interesting because you're a pretty amazing person.
Mm-hmm.
That's what my inside voice is saying.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm trying to think, I wonder what the contribution of a history of oppression has in our final decision about ourselves. And then, we kind of talked about this topic of discipline. We're kind of merging into that. What does it take
Mm-hmm.
to, right? The place of consciousness is this is what's happening. Can we move that consciousness into a strategy and a discipline of change, of adapting?
It is possible. I'm just trying to think of, what have I done? Because I know I have fallen into that trap of, you know, um, comparing myself to others, not feeling like I could live up to the standards of that individual who I don't even know, right? And what am I doing? We talked about this in another podcast. Shame, right?
Mm.
That internal shame that I've enveloped myself in, that I need to break through. Um, One thing that I remember doing some time ago, and it helped me quite a bit. I mean, it does take some internal work. At first, it's the observation that what am I doing? What's my contribution to this? It's not just, oh, they don't like me. They don't like me because dot dot dot. It's like, what's my contribution to all of this? And I have to do some internal work. And um, I was triggered. Is that the right word? just by, words like slut, whore, just the person who might be just very sexually active and that kind of thing. And I didn't want to be seen that way, or you have labels those particular labels put on me by other people, even though I was very sexually active and continue to be, but was wary of being called that. Oh, you're just a slut. Oh, you're a whore. That kind of thing. And and I had to kind of look at that. So what is it about my sexual expression that I'm kind of shaming? I'm a sexually active person. That's an okay thing. I don't have to shame that. And and I did some relanguaging. I just had to reframe some things.
Mm.
And and so instead of looking at words like slut or whore or some other ones, I guess, that are out there that are not really coming to mind, but instead of seeing those terms as bad, either reframing them or even embracing them and saying, you know what, that's okay. I can be that and be okay with that. So I was able to, I don't know, I can't think of what the exact process was, but it was really looking at those terms, words, and feelings around it and seeing if I can kind of muddle through it to change my feelings around it and make my own sexual expression good and positive. And if I got called a slut, I'm like, so be it.
Yeah.
So be it. And I think I modeled that particular terming and relanguaging with even just being a Black individual too. Um, or like you'll see like in the Black community where certain words are used just among Black people, okay, and they see that as some words as terms of endearment, connection, and all of that, but it stays kind of contained in that community, right? But if it gets used or someone else uses these types of terms, that's not, you don't do that. You don't do that. But within the circle of our own community and family and livelihood and all of that, those words can be used as and are used as, terms of endearment.
Yeah.
And we embrace them. And we're not going to use them as, we're not going to be put down by them, if someone else calls us that. So I kind of use that modeling just to help my, like, I'm okay. I'm all right with being a sexually active person.
Fairies do that too. The radical fairies.
Oh yeah.
With the word faggot.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. I think that's a really good one. I think even today, in today's time, where fag at some point, fag and faggot, oh no. But I think part of the community has really embraced that word.
Well, and the word queer, when I grew up,
Not exactly.
Yeah.
Not a good word.
In fact, if I work with older gay people, I will specifically not use the word queer because it still triggers that history.
That makes sense.
Well, and what's interesting too, there's a book called The Immortality Key. But there's, if you look at the history of early Christendom, right? Who hung out at the temples?
The
prostitutes,
yeah, exactly, yeah.
And they were used for sacred purposes. I don't know the origin of those particular words, but what's interesting is those folks had a particular place even within religious society.
Yeah, yeah.
And somewhere along the line, right, we've kind of shifted the perspective on that. And I think, we had an episode where we talked about sex magic.
Yeah.
Which got a lot of responses.
It did, yeah.
Because I think it invited people to examine and to explore the narratives around their sexuality. And, but that's a tough one. I was raised in a pretty conservative place, in a conservative world. mixed in with Mormonism. And as much as I love sexuality and sensuality, I still recognize I have certain edges around what's appropriate versus inappropriate, and what are the lines of decency, if you will,
Sure.
right? But I know when those things come up, I'm kind of like, do what you do. It's like I have to go to my head and say, okay, whose story is that?
Whose story is that?
Did I buy into a story? This is coming from the Four Agreements and Ruiz's, right? But whose story is it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it one that I was socialized to believe in?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it an authentic expression? Is it where my spirit takes me?
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's a strong consideration. I wanted to ask you a question, because we did talk about shame a couple of weeks ago.
Right.
And you brought up shame again. And the question that came to mind was, what's the antidote to shame? Like we know what shame is. It's hard to define, but we kind of recognize it as like an energetic. And so if I'm trying to work out of shame about my body, about my sexuality, whatever the self-esteem, whatever it is, what is the antidote to shame?
I think you're starting to touch on it. It does take some self-analysis. You got to kind of sit and kind of sit with it, and rather than kind of pointing the finger and saying, well, they make me feel a certain way, they did that to me, it's what's my relationship to this feeling. How, why am I expressing myself this way, and how am I accountable? What's my part? And one of the things that comes to mind, and perhaps as a process, and maybe a part of an anecdote, is something that's called Big Mind. It's a Buddhist practice, but it's a westernized version of this, of some Buddhist practices. But and I use it in therapy sometimes. But it's kind of very gestalt, where, let's say it's shame. Okay, here's shame. How does shame show up? How do you feel it? What is it? How does it manifest in your body? Where do you feel it? What does your body do? What do you say? Those kinds of things. And if we can then maybe personify shame, and then maybe speak to that person, shame, to get a better understanding of who they are, what their intention is, why are they around, what their function is, when they show up. Just kind of, sit like I'm having a conversation with you, have a conversation with shame. And so the individual who is experiencing shame becomes shame, embodies that person, and speaks as shame. And it's a very fascinating and pretty powerful experience, because the person gets to learn why the shame shows up, and at what times, and what their origin story is, and why they even stick around, and what their purpose is. And I think if we can do something like that, then instead of being confronted with shame, it's something that we can maybe just live alongside. Because shame is probably just it shows up sometimes. Instead of feeling like it's going to overtake you, we can have a relationship with it, and even ask it when it's starting to show up and it doesn't need to. It's like, no, wait a minute, Mr. Shame, you don't need to show up today. I'm good. I'm fine right here. So that's one of the things that kind of comes to mind: accountability, some self-work, and really getting to know what that emotion is, and to understand it, maybe reframe it, and maybe even ask it to leave. What are some of your thoughts on kind of anecdote for shame? Any thoughts?
Well, I do have some thought, but my one thought, it would be interesting to demonstrate what you just talked about. But let me answer your question, because I think my answer will be quicker, but then you can ponder if we should do this. I think the antidote to shame is liberation. liberation, being liberated, because shame has this capacity to contain us,
Yes.
to shut us down,
Right.
to hold us hostage.
Exactly.
And so, however way, in this inner dialogue that you're talking about, certainly sounds like a pathway to that, right? I often think to myself, this holds me back. And if I can propel myself out of that space, I will find myself liberated.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of been my word. Maybe it's my word for 2025 is liberation, because I think about all the things that I keep myself from doing or experiencing or stepping into. I don't know that it's shame that holds me back. It could be shame, it could be guilt, it could be self-doubt,
Yeah.
whatever it is. But if I just say, okay, wait a minute, I'm going to give myself permission to have this new experience and to step out into this process in a different way. When I've successfully gone into that space, I think, wow, like I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
It was interesting. Nick has been having me do this particular exercise, and Nick is always thinking about safety. And so when we originally set up this exercise, I was supposed to kind of hold on to these things to kind of protect myself from falling.
Mm.
Well, today I was working out with him, and we decided not to use the cheats.
Mm-hmm.
And my first thought was, I don't think I can do
I can do this, yeah.
because I haven't done it before.
Right.
And so I just kind of looked at that and I thought,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm going to try.
Mm-hmm.
Tried it, actually did it.
Yeah.
Did it, I thought, fairly well.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought, wow, that just liberated this place of self-doubt.
Mm-hmm.
I experimented with something different, and I now know the scope of my capacity.
Yes, yes. I think you touch on some really key things as far as kind of moving forward out of shame or any other kind of heavy emotion into liberation and freedom. It is we kind of sit in a space like shame or guilt or anxiety, and it's kind of comfortable there, right? We get comfortable there. And um, one of the things you said, because you thought you could not do that thing because you had not done it before. And so I think that holds us back too. Well, I've never done that before, so we don't know. We're the fear of the unknown, right? So what's the worst thing that's going to happen? You might fall, you might lose your balance. What's the worst thing that's going to happen in that situation? But because I haven't done it, I stay away from it. I'm just going to stay in my little safety zone, right? But once you kind of give yourself that permission or that oomph, or you get encouraged or something just to walk through the door or try that thing and have what you might consider a positive experience, then, oh my gosh, I mean, a flutter of doors just start to fly open. A new perspective is suddenly at your presence, and your narrative can start to rapidly change, right? And shift. And then just that moment can begin to reinforce the stepping forward. Well, maybe I can do this.
Right.
I'll try it again.
Right.
And maybe you'll have another success, right? I see that with yoga. And tantra is really about that. The kind of the overall premise of the tantra philosophy. It's about, it's about the self, taking care of yourself, but liberating yourself. But liberating yourself means you need to you need to know what you're liberating yourself from. I mean, you need to know what you're liberating yourself toward. What's holding you down, what's holding you back. You need to identify that, and once you can identify it, and then you can do these processes, whatever it may be, to start to break through some kind of energetic thing to get the body moving, get the mind moving. In yoga, it's movement. In yoga, it's breathing. In tantra, it might be movement, breath work, sensuality, even. Going to the gym, same thing. It's just try it. I catch myself, there's a thing I want to try, over at the gym. And there's a machine over there. I've seen someone use it and I've never even touched it. But in my head, I'm going, oh, I can't do that. But my little mantra is, John, just do it. John, just do it.
Or I might look at that machine and think, I have no idea how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I might be afraid of looking incompetent.
Yes.
What will others think
Mm-hmm.
if they see me struggling with it?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, right.
Because I know I'll do that with it, and I think I must look like a freaking idiot, right? Because I'm kind of stumbling over it. Nick has been having me do these overhead squats.
Ooh.
Where, right, it's a squat with weights over your head.
Oh God, that's hard.
And it's a very different. And when he first showed it to me, I couldn't get anything right about it. Now I'm able to get maybe 75% into the position. I think I'm clearly on the trajectory of doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting. I practice a lot when he's not around. I hate it when he is around because then I get like a little bit more conscious about it. But what's interesting is I know the other guys in the gym are watching. And so I've had to practice being uncomfortable with not knowing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yes.
And that in and of itself has been an interesting stretch because at the gym,
you got to, yeah. Right. Yoga's like that too. I don't get a lot of men that come to yoga because they feel like, well, I'm strong, but I'm not flexible, and I don't want to be falling over and not being able to do a stretch because all these stretchy people are going to be around me and looking at me, so I ain't going. Right? End of story. They're afraid of what they might look like to other people.
Yeah. But it's been an interesting lesson. Like, what if we gave ourselves permission to practice not knowing what we're doing?
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it, if you took a step back, that's normal.
Yeah.
Right? We don't step into something being an expert at it.
Well, it's like, frankly, I don't know how to cruise that well.
Practice, Jerry. Just practice.
So I hang out with those who do. It's like, is he cruising? Like, no, he's really not interested. Yes, take the bait.
Okay, go. This is your moment.
But yeah. So we started out with this topic of, right, our comparisons, the ways that we disqualify ourselves. Now we're in this place of perceived competency, which is interesting. We're all having this human experience together.
Yes.
None of us have ever done this human thing before.
Right.
I love this little, there's this little video clip that's been circulating around Instagram. And it's this older woman. And she's giving like a prayer or something. And she just kind of starts riffing. But she goes, please forgive. She goes, oh, this must be age related. Please forgive me. I've never been this age before.
Yes.
I'm trying to figure it out as I go along. And there's all these little surprises that come up, right? And it's so funny, right? Because when I find myself in a situation, I always say, I've never been in this situation before. I've never been this age before. I've never been this person before. In fact, when we're done with this podcast, we're not going to be who we were when we showed up.
Right.
And so, but we kind of create this interesting illusion of competency and capacity and capability, and we have our awards and our pat on the asses and whatever. And the reality is we're all just kind of struggling moment to moment to make sense of things.
Yeah.
And what would happen if we could just liberate that and just allow ourselves to be in that place of authenticity, that place of curiosity and wonderment, as opposed to colonization and capturing and conquering.
Yeah.
Right? It's almost like it's in our DNA.
It really is. And I think that's part of that reframing. Instead of going in, let's say it's, the person coming to a workshop or a retreat or just a social event, and they're really, anxious and feeling like they're not going to fit in.
Yep.
But yeah, just giving yourself that permission to be anxious. It's okay. That's
Yeah.
a normal thing. Just be human.
Yeah.
It's okay to be nervous. Rather than going in, I got to be the socialite of the century in order to fit in. And what hat do I have to put on? And what outfit do I need to wear to look the part? Just show up.
Yeah. Yeah. Before a lodge, it's interesting when we have our newcomers come to lodge. There's so much anxiety about getting it right, not having any mistakes, blah, blah, blah. And so I always tell people, even I give them explicit permission, relax, we got you.
Mm-hmm.
There's this like mistrust, like, I still got to look good. But then after the first round, I'll just tell people, all right, you know what you're in. We got 3 more rounds. You just figured out what the first one's about. So now that you're done with your curiosity and questioning, you know what it is. Now settle in and do the work.
Yeah, exactly.
And by the time everyone gets out, it's like, okay, nobody here's a virgin anymore.
You did the deed. Yeah. But go into something with curiosity and wonderment, rather than that stifling, sense of, oh, I'm going to be anxious, I'm going to be able to fit in. But
and you were talking about your yoga class, and our schedules never really match, but every once in a while I get to go to one of your yoga classes. And yes, I'm a little anxious because I think, I wonder where I'm at in this. And I clearly hear you giving explicit permission to work within your capacity. But what's been interesting for me the times that I've showed up is, oh, I can do more of this than I realized I could.
Right.
And I may not be doing what Miss Pretzel's doing over here.
Right.
But I feel good about what I'm doing. Like, it gives me permission to like evaluate and assess. And in those situations, I often think, oh, I would like to be able to master that move. Or sometimes when I've gone to your class, I may not go to your classes a lot, but I'll remember some of the moves. And when I'm at the gym, I'll do some of those moves because I realized in the class, oh, that was a really good core thing. Or I really liked how that loosened up my hips or my glutes or whatever. And so, yeah, sometimes, in fact, I've gotten to the point now, if I go into a class or something and I'm not sure who's going to be there, I just think, okay, this is just part of the routine. Part of the yoga practice is working on the psyche.
Yeah.
And part of my psyche says, do I belong here? And I'm going to give myself permission to be here.
Yeah.
And I think that could apply to the retreats, lodge, anything. Going to a social event. In fact, Bruce and I have been invited to go somewhere in June that is probably outside of our point of reference in many ways. And our approach is, let's do it. Like, if it's miserable, then it will end eventually.
Yeah.
But what I anticipate is, I look at it as a point of adventure. Like, we're the Indiana Jones of that moment.
There you go.
We're going to have a new experience, and let's see where this takes us.
Exactly. That's that wonderment. That's that curiosity. I might learn something from this. I might even meet someone pretty interesting at this event.
Yeah.
Right. Just open the opportunity for what could happen in a good way, rather than, like I said, stifle yourself in the unknown. Right. Just making up all these stories about the situation. And so maybe a word for this, like you talk about liberation, freeing yourself. I say this in yoga a lot too. Soften around the pose. We find ourselves getting really rigid and stiff, and we hold our breath. When you really, in order to have a successful experience with the pose, is to actually to relax. yeah, you got to engage your core and some other things, but you have to be able to breathe and settle into the pose.
Yeah.
Right? And you'll find that you can actually do the pose. It'll just feel better.
Which is a powerful metaphor. I mean, you're talking about yoga, but if I'm going into that gay bowling club for the first time, or if I'm going to that social event or that retreat, right? Like, okay, soften, breathe. Where's your head? Like, where's my dialogue?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would tell you as a therapist, and maybe this has just become so habitual that I'm often surprised that people are not conscious of how they think. Ruiz talks about it. He calls it the mitote, right? That choir of voices that's always going that we're not always tuned into until we tune into it. And sometimes I think I'm too tuned into my inner dialogue. But what's nice about the being tuned into is, I like the idea of being tuned because, it's out of tune. I can bring focus. I can bring a layer of consciousness that allows me to see it with a little bit more precision or a little bit more latitude or a little bit more liberation.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
can we, because we did this little, shift in our conversation, coming back to what we started with, can we apply some of these things, liberation, softening, around what we started with, kind of comparing ourselves and perspectives and things like that? Can we bring that back around to those experiences?
No.
No. Well, that's the end. No.
I don't think so. What are you talking about? Well,
a little echo.
I hit a good frequency there.
Yes.
I think I told you Nick said something to me in our session that like flipped my paradigm.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, what would it take when he flipped that? It just put me in this, like, it took me in unfamiliar territory. Right.
Yep.
And instead of dismissing it, which was almost reflexive, like, right.
Yeah.
But to contemplate the potentiality of what he said was inviting, was like, I like that potential. I like that idea.
Yes.
That, and what's interesting, because I've had such a interesting transformation, the other day we were working out at the gym, and this woman has seen us work out, and for a while Nick has been really busy, so I've been working out on my own, and I don't talk to this woman very often. It's usually like a head nod or something. Right. But she saw Nick there, and the synchronicity of us all kind of being in the same space. She came up and said, well, it's good to see you again, blah, blah, blah. And she goes, and he's been busting ass. And then she kind of proceeded to like make these observations of what I've been doing for the last couple of months at the gym on my own. She never ever said anything to me.
Yeah.
But I thought, how interesting that she's watching. And I've had a couple of people at the gym who will come up and say, wow, like, you're really working hard. How old are you? Like they're kind of curious that something's going on. And it always catches me by surprise, but it's also an interesting lesson that sometimes we're so consumed about kind of being invisible, or that maybe we're not being seen. And I think it's interesting that perhaps we're not in a culture that throws out a lot of compliments anymore. Used to be we did that, but we don't anymore. And so it's interesting, like, if people were watching you, what would be their observation? Not what you think about what you can or can't do, but if somebody were watching you, a colleague at work or a friend, and I've done this with clients where I say, look, we will develop a questionnaire in my session. I said, now I want you to take this questionnaire to 3 people, and I do not want them to send it to you. I want them to send it to me.
Oh, wow.
And then we're going to talk about their responses.
Oh, wow.
And invite people to be candid.
Uh-huh.
And so it's really interesting where a client's perception of themselves is being directly challenged by a loved one or a friend or somebody who's being candid in their feedback. And usually there's this huge disparity.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, that's good. That's a good exercise.
Yeah. And so I often think this lesson at the gym for me is like, not that I'm doing anything to get anyone's attention, but it is interesting that people, because I know I'm watching. I would probably watch someone like you and I think, no. But I might also think like, wow, look at how he's doing those curls, or look at how he's doing those squats, or I notice he's always spending time on flexibility or something. And frankly, there's a day I was watching this guy do this interesting exercise. And I had seen this exercise, but his variation was really interesting. And I thought, wow, I think I'm going to try that when he's not here. So, yeah, I wonder what happened. Maybe the answer to your question is, how do we change the feedback loop in a way that we're not so consumed with our one and only perception, but that we start to kind of see ourselves as others might see us?
Yeah. I think we were going to have a whole topic on that, I think, for the podcast too. Just how we perceive each other and
write it down.
Yeah, I'll write that down. But I think you're right, because I'm just thinking about my own experience going into the gym, and because I can certainly have that feeling of, oh, I wish I had bigger legs, or I wish I had this or that, because they've got it and I want that, right?
Yeah.
Start to do this comparison thing, and so, so what I have to do and what I have done is, because I know, because I'm watching them and they might be watching me, and I have to remember folks might be watching me and seeing what I'm doing. I know one thing that I'm kind of proud of, because I go to the gym just about every day. And so at least the front desk people, they see me every day. It's like, this guy's here every day. And I see some other folks, and we're all there kind of just about there every day. Or some guys that are there just, once in a while, but when I'm always there. It's like, this guy he's always here. But I'm watching other people. But instead of comparing, it's like, oh, I wish I had that and all that, I'm motivated. And I get curious. It's like, oh, I like how they're doing that exercise. And I'm going to try that. I'm going to try that out. And just try it on for size. And so that helps me to shift my own narrative about myself, really, that instead of going in and comparing, I'm going in and being motivated and inspired.
Do you ever ask that person what they're doing?
I have. Some people I have.
Or talk to them about it?
Yeah. It's rare. I don't always. I do stay kind of distant and solo. But sometimes there's some interaction.
But what do you think that's about? Because I do the same thing, right? I think, like, when I was watching this guy do this box thing, it's interesting. I wanted to ask him about, like, how do you do that? And but I immediately disqualified myself from approaching him, because what's he gonna think? Is he gonna blah blah blah? Or he's just too good to share it with me. Like, I'm just making up some narratives, but there's a narrative that kept me from, like, I'll just watch. Right?
Yeah. That same. I do the same thing.
Yeah. And what's interesting, there's been a couple occasions. There's this one guy that comes to the gym all the time who, I know he's gay. He has an amazing workout. And so one day I thought, I'm just going to ask him a question about his workout. Now, the story I had in my head was, he was like, he's out of my league, right? Whatever league we're talking about, but I just kind of disqualified myself, right? And then I also maybe painted a picture that he would be arrogant or put off or whatever. So I went up and I said, "Hi, my name is Jerry."
Oh,
Shook
wow.
his hand.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
And I said, we share a lot of mutual friends on Facebook. And that's why I know he's gay. And I just said, we have a lot of mutual friends on Facebook. He goes, yeah, I noticed that.
Mm.
And then I just proceeded to ask him about what he was doing. But we had and now every day when I go to the gym and he's there, we don't necessarily, because I'm in my headphones, he's in his headphones,
Right.
but we acknowledge
Knowledge.
some
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Yeah.
connection.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a lot of courage.
It does take
I
courage.
just thought, oh, fuck, right? But I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, I'm kind of glad I did that.
Yeah.
Right?
It's probably just dispelled so many myths and stories that you had created, right?
And maybe he had created about me.
Right. Like, oh, this is a friendly guy.
Yeah. Well, I think we talked about this when I very first met Nick. I was just like, I don't think he's going to help us out.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because he's who he is. And, and there's this amazing friendship that's happened.
Yeah.
Right? But it took just crossing that line.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just saying it because it's not an easy line to do. And
Yeah.
I think going back to the comparison thing, the comparison, I think, is a byproduct of how we judge and critique ourselves in relationship to others, body, mind, spirit.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
I know that people, it's interesting how many people will hesitate to contact me about some kind of a spiritual kind of an issue that they're having because they have a story about me being too busy or not accessible or why would I? And I very welcome those conversations. I love those conversations. I sometimes think, why don't we have them more?
Yeah.
But I recognize people project a story.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so I think that comparison thing takes us back to that piece of I have to be willing,
Mm-hmm.
I have to dare to be disciplined to do something different, to dare to fail.
And be okay with that.
Yeah.
Because you'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
You will be okay. Yeah. I think that's probably bottom line. I mean, so many conversations can come from this. Whether it's, we've talked about shame, we've talked about body image and just anecdotes for these things. So many wonderful conversations. So we're going to ask you, dear listener, to contribute to the conversation. What do you think about all this? Do you find yourself in these kinds of situations, holding on to these narratives and keeping your own door closed of potential opportunities? And maybe look at some of these alternatives, ways that you can open the door, practicing, being okay with being nervous, being okay with just kind of the normalcy of humanity. We're all going through these very similar things. And if we just kind of rallied around each other, around it, and just kind of talked about it, we're going to find a lot of similarities. Mm-hmm. And you can be able to soften those shoulders and be okay.
Yeah.
Be okay with you and be okay with any kind of circumstance you might be walking into that might feel intimidating at first. But give it a shot. Give it a shot.
I think we should start reminding people we have our retreat in April.
That's right.
We have, we're trying to do either heart circles and pipe ceremonies or sweat lodges on a more frequent basis for 2025. John has his yoga classes and tantric sessions that he's hosting. So there's lots of things for people to come and to try out.
Yeah, try it out.
But we would love to hear reviews on the podcast. We'd love for you to come and check out the retreat, which is basically an extended version of the podcast for 2 days.
Yeah, really.
And engaging in the conversation, ritual, practice, and evolution of sense of self.
Yeah. And I'll just invite people too, because if you are kind of interested or just curious, that's a start, that's a step. And even if you don't show up this next time in April, maybe in September you'll come. But if you have questions now, please feel free to reach out to us, email, Instagram, anything like that, because we will get back to you. Because if you have questions around what happens or how should I show up and what should, any kind of questions, ask and we'll get back to you.
Ask and you shall receive.
Yeah. Ask and you shall receive.
All right.
Yeah. So thanks again, and we will see you next time on the Mindfully Gay podcast. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Mindfully Gay podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation today, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. This way you won't miss out on any of our upcoming episodes, where we continue to explore fascinating topics and share meaningful stories. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next episode.